Hello, I'm Travis Wuchter. I am the historian for the Pennsylvania Association of Arson Investigators, and we are here at the 2025 Jack Christmas Training Seminar here in State College, Pennsylvania. I'm joined today by Mr. Brian Gray, who is a longtime member of the PAAI, former president, former board member, and we are here to get his take on the PAAI, some of its history, and some about Brian as well. So thank you for doing this, Brian. Appreciate
Thank you for having me,
you
Travis.
being here and sitting with me to talk a little bit about PAAI and yourself. Just like to get started by asking you to tell me a little bit about yourself, your family, your career, and just basically who is Brian Gray.
Okay. Obviously I'm married. I married my high school sweetheart, so that's one of the good things that happened to me in my lifetime. I joined the volunteer fire service in 1975, so this year will mark 50 years I've been in the volunteer fire service, and served in many capacities in the volunteer fire service up to and including being the chief of the department. That, in essence, is how I got started in this career. Mm-hmm. And I take that as, I tell people I'm a lucky guy because I was able to turn what started out as a hobby for me into a career. And I've told people for years, if you enjoy what you're doing, you never really work a day in your life,
right.
Because you're enjoying it. And I have. I'm fully retired now, but I joined the PAAI in 1982, so this year will mark 43 years that I've been
Wow.
involved with this organization, and I'd like to say actively involved because I've attended training over the years, up until I retired about, 2 years ago I partially retired from EFI Global. I served at EFI Global as their regional manager, overseeing the Pittsburgh office of EFI Global and overseeing the fire investigators and engineers and whatnot in that office. So I did that up until I partially retired in 2022. And I say that as partially retired because it's something I've told everybody in this business, that if you're working in the private sector especially, you need to retire 5 years before you're ready to retire because
Right.
the work you've done, all of a sudden there's ongoing cases there, and a couple of years later you may be called to have to go to court or something, so you're not
Right.
fully retired. I quit doing active fire investigation work, I said, in March of 2022, so that gave me 20 years of service at EFI Global.
Can you tell me a little bit about EFI Global?
EFI Global is a worldwide fire and engineering, forensic investigation firm. I started at EFI 2002 because I spent 20 years there. 2002, I started at EFI Global. Prior to that, I worked as a fire investigator at Robson Lapina, which is another private fire and engineering firm based out of Lancaster, PA. And when I first started doing this in a professional manner, was with former president and private fire investigator Ben Cipher. So that's where I got started doing this professionally. Prior to that, I was in business for myself. I was a self-employed contractor. And when I started into this business, I took a class as a firefighter on firefighter responsibility and fire origin and cause determination. And that was taught by the fire marshal from the community next to mine, which I live in Plum Borough, Allegheny County. And that class was taught by Jack Mason, who's a former president of this organization. And I said he was the fire marshal in Penn Hills, and he was also an instructor, and he taught these classes. So I took this class with Jack, and as a chief officer in my fire department at the time, it really piqued my interest. And he said to me, he said, if you are interested in this, here's this organization, the Pennsylvania Association of Arson Investigators. You might want to think about joining that organization. And obviously in 1982, I joined the PAAI. Jack is probably the biggest mentor I had. He's really, got me started in this, taught me a lot. I used to work, a lot of fires with Jack. So I was able to do that, get more involved, and I got very involved in this organization. I was elected to 2 full terms on the board of directors for the organization. And then I was nominated and elected to the position of second vice president, which then, those were 2-year terms. You go from second vice president, first vice president, and then president. So I was president from 1997 to 1999. It's hard when I think back how many years ago that was when I was looking at stuff to do this interview. But it's an awful long time ago.
Yeah.
But I served as president for those years, and even after I was done with president, I still stayed very active in this organization and still attending basically all the training that was going on, because wanting to do this full time and then being able to work myself to do that, has been the big bonus for me, and there's a lot of people I have to thank, but I said number one is Jack Mason, who was my big mentor. Another one was Ben Cipher, that gave me the first opportunity to do this, and that came about after, I think it was 1986. This is shortly after the Certified Fire Investigator program came out from the International Association of Arson Investigators. And we had, at that time, of course there were no CFIs in Pennsylvania. So the chapter decided to get on board with the International and offer the CFI test in Pennsylvania here, which was done up here at the Ramada Inn. I want to say it was 1986. I'm not exactly sure on that, but I think that's what year it was. We had over 20 people sit and take the CFI test that time, and I was one of those people, which, to be honest, I was scared to death. I mean, I'm sitting in that room and I'm looking at all these guys that were teaching me all these classes. These were guys, were out here doing this on a full-time basis.
Right.
A lot of the state fire marshals, and and I'm sitting there. I'm like, why am I even in this room? But I took the test. Thank God I passed the test, and I became a CFI. And then after I got the CFI is when Ben offered me, to come to work for him part-time. I wasn't a full-time person with Ben, but I went to work for him part-time. And then Ron Lapina, who was a partner in Lapina, or Robson Lapina, he hired me to come to work for them as a fire investigator, and I was there until, like I said, in 2002 I left there and went to EFI, started as a fire investigator there, and then became the manager, and then I became a regional manager, and on and on and on until it was time to retire. And after I was done being president, this chapter honored me, I guess I'll say, by nominating me to run for the board of directors of the International Association of Arson Investigators. I got appointed to there are 3-year terms in the International. I got appointed to a 1-year term to fill a vacancy by the IAAI president at that time, and then I ran for 2 terms and was elected 2 times, so I served a total of 7 years on the International Association of Arson Investigators board of directors. So that's kind of basically it in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of experience and time spent in this organization and the mothership, if you will, the IAAI. So you mentioned Jack Mason was an influence and kind of got you into the organization, the PAAI. What did that mean in terms of your career, becoming a member of this organization, and what did it mean to you personally too?
Well, like I said, I feel very lucky to be able to take what started as a hobby, because it was. I said, this is fascinating stuff when I took that first class. It's just fascinating. I mean, we go to these fires as a fire department all the time. You put them out and you go home. Or maybe call the county fire marshal to come investigate it, but, you're back at the engine house cleaning up equipment. It's over and done with. But, him teaching that class, it just piqued the curiosity and interest. I said, okay, we're going to these fires, well, what's causing them? So then I just started talking to Jack about it, and I said, Jack, has become one of my best friends, and to this day we're best friends. And it just got me to thinking about this and realizing, I said, this is very interesting. And how can I get more? How can I get more? You get that hungry, searching for that knowledge and stuff. And that's what I said. Jack suggested I join this group, and for many years when I was first coming up here, I mean, there was nobody that paid for me to be here. I was paying a lot of my own pocket to come up here and train, because my fire department wouldn't pay for it. They weren't that, they didn't pay for it. I wasn't working for anybody that would pay for me to be here.
Right.
So, I mean, I was paying to come up here out of my own pocket, which I didn't care, because it's something that, like I said, fascinated me. It's something that I wanted to do. And I say, when I'm able to take my hobby and turn it into a career, to me that was a big bonus, and it's served me very well over the years. I have no regrets, none.
So what do you enjoy, or what did you enjoy the most about fire investigation?
Solving the problem. Being able to solve that problem, that'll give any fire investigator a good feeling. When you're able to go out and solve the problem, and obviously, as we know, you can't solve them all. But if you can go out there and do a good investigation and solve the problem, then you feel good, and you feel like you've helped somebody, whether you help the insured or whatever, 'cause my experience, I said, is 99% is in the private sector. It wasn't much in the public sector, but it was basically in the private sector. So if you're going out and you can able to help these people, it just gives you a good feeling, and you have good feeling of a job well done if you get out and feel you've had a successful investigation, and you're able to determine what happened, and give resolution to either your client or the insured or whatever. That's a good feeling.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, because it almost word for word is what George Umberger, the second vice president of the organization, said last year when I interviewed him. So it sounds like it's a common theme that problem solving is a big motivator and a reward, really, in this industry.
It is. I firmly believe that. And something else I've told people for years too. This is not, being a fire investigator is not something you do because you're looking for a job. Because, if you don't have that motivation, and if you don't have that dedication to go out and, for lack of a better term, dig and solve these problems, because they're problems. You have to define that problem and solve that problem, according to 921. And if you go out and do that and solve that problem, then you've done good. And somebody's just looking for a job to go put in their 8 hours and go home. This is not a profession for them. This is not.
Yeah.
You need to be dedicated to this profession.
Right. So you were president for a term, on the board a couple terms.
Yes.
What would you say in those years, and maybe even before and after, what were some of the biggest accomplishments of the PAAI?
Well, I mean, obviously, you look at growth and you look at where you're going. I mean, I joined the organization, prior to NFPA 921. And I just for the fun of it, I brought the very first edition of NFPA 921, which is just a stapled little document that came out in 1992. Prior to that, it was basically, you were taught those old wives' tales that now today science has proven to be the fallacies. You look at the spalling of concrete, the crazing of glass, the annealing of bread springs. We were taught, back in if you see those, that's an indication of a really fast, hot fire, and that's arson. And a lot of stuff. It's arson because I say so. I'm the fire investigator, and that was good enough. Sadly, it is sad when you look at today at some of that. So. I came up in the era when 921 first came out. A lot of the investigators that had been around and doing it for quite a few years were dead set against it. I don't need any document to tell me what I'm doing. And so, there was a really growth and transition period of what I'm going to call old school that had been doing this for years before 921 came out, and the transition to now people getting into this field see 921 from the start and realize this is what we need to do. So back in those days, when the document first came out, there was a lot of growing pains in this organization going through it. A lot of spirited discussion, and whatnot throughout that process. But like I said, more editions came out, and it became more of the standard. It's a guide, but it's a standard. Let's not fool ourselves. It became more and more that people accepted it, knew they had to follow it in order to do their jobs. So that was a big thing that, in my early years of coming up, is seeing this transition from, when I say old school to current school. And not saying there's anything wrong with that old school, but again, the science has shown that some of that stuff that, was believed back then, science has proven not to be true, and we need to change our ways and stuff, which I think this organization has done. One of the things when I was president that we did that we hadn't done before was partner with the IAAI in bringing in an IAAI sponsored class in Pittsburgh, which was on small appliance fires. So we ran a 2-day seminar in Pittsburgh, sponsored by the IAAI. So we, trying to get more involved with the IAAI in doing some things and bringing some of their classes and stuff into the organization. Back in those days, we had over 700 members. And you look at that and I go, well, where'd they all go? And I don't know. That was a lot of members, but I think a lot of them were just, I don't want to say just, that's a bad choice of words, but volunteer firemen who maybe had an interest in it, but weren't really doing it. They liked it because it was something neat, and they got a newsletter to read, every quarter, something to just look at and read through. But if they weren't actively involved in it, and I said, is this profession evolved? I think a lot of those people just kind of faded away because they said, this isn't what I'm doing in my career, so it's, I'm not going to get my certification, I'm not going to do this, and I think that, pushed some of that stuff away, and people's lifestyles change.
Right. Yeah, there's more distractions now.
Well, there's more distraction. There's more, two person working in a family now. That the firefighter, the person had an interest. I'm not going to say the man, because it could be the man or the husband or the wife. Needs to be home and take care of the kids because the wife works nights, and so they don't have time. I mean, that's the same problem that we face in volunteer fire services right now. That people don't have the time to dedicate. And this profession being just a little small sliver of some of that, saying on the fire side of it, that's something that people might just have to give up because we just don't have the time to do it unless you're fully involved in the profession. So, how many fire investigators are there in Pennsylvania? I have no clue. I couldn't tell you how many fire investigators there are in Pennsylvania. I do remember back when I first started with Ben, there were probably about half a dozen in the whole state, fire investigation firms. And you go in western Pennsylvania, where Ben Seifert was from, Saxonburg in Butler County. I mean, in western Pennsylvania or in West Virginia, he was the only person. He was the only name. He was the only one. And now, I mean, there's half a dozen or more fire investigator and companies just in western Pennsylvania, where I'm from, so I'm more familiar with it. But it's growing.
I'm curious, you mentioned the CFIs. Prior to, I guess it was, I think 1986 is when you mentioned them coming to Pennsylvania.
Somewhere right around there. I think I would.
How did folks get those, or didn't they get them?
The CFI?
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty much the same as it was now. You had to get an application from the IAAI, and they based it on your training, experience, and education. You had to acquire so many points through doing so many investigations, attending so much training, court testimony, and what have you. Those were all requirements, which is still pretty much the same today, to get that CFI. And if you could meet those requirements, you put in an application to the IAAI. They would review those applications and either approve or deny your ability to sit and take that test, which I was petrified. As a young guy, I was petrified. Like I said, looking around the room and all the older fellas the experienced investigators have been doing this for years, and here's this young kid. I'm wet behind the ears, trying to take this test. But
where did you take the test prior to it being in Pennsylvania? Like,
it was a fairly new program then. So, once somebody from the IAAI would have to proctor that test for you.
Right.
And after we had established CFIs in Pennsylvania, the chapter had appointed, and that time it was Ben Cipher, to be the proctor for CFI exams. So let's say, an example, you put in an application, to take the CFI test, go through the IAAI. They would review that application. They would approve that application. And then they would send the information to Ben Cipher, say, hey, Travis is approved to take the CFI test. He would make arrangements with, whoever the testee was, make arrangements to, meet somewhere. And, he would sit and proctor that test for, I think he had 2 hours to take the test. I became a proctor after Ben retired, so I used to proctor the tests in Pennsylvania. Some we would do in this very room. If I had somebody that was, eligible and approved to take the test and say, I'm going to be up at the seminar this year, I said, okay, then I'll get the test. We'll proctor the test up at State College this year. So, I proctored several tests up here. I did a lot in my office. The guys would come in and I'd, proctor the test in my conference room at my office. So that's how the testing got done.
So one of the great contributions, what I'm hearing is of the PAAI is the these sorts of trainings like we're having this weekend, providing the CFIs, the testing. I know that we do an evidence a class here and a test and so forth. And folks come from around the region to take those. So it seems to me that it has contributed to the professional development of folks in the industry.
Absolutely.
To a large degree.
Absolutely. This whole organization and the IAAI itself is predicated on training and education. That's what we're here for.
Right.
We're here to train and educate. That's our sole purpose. So that's what we need to continue to do. We need to keep bringing in key instructors and top people to try and to educate our members and
right.
keep moving things along in the right direction.
So talking a little bit about the future, so in 3 years we're going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the PAAI, and that's something that as an organization we need to start to think about how we're going to approach that. But as that anniversary approaches, what would you like to see the PAAI accomplish in the next 3 years and moving forward beyond the 50th?
Well, again, continuous training and education. I think that with this constant evolution of 921, 1033, and that new standard 1342, I think it is, which nobody really even knows what it's about yet. They just know a little bit about it, me included. I can't remember what the exact title on it is. I got it written down. But, I think that as far as training education goes, that's where a large focus of our training and education should be. Because we get so many new people that get moved into these positions as fire investigator that don't really have a whole lot of training. And, it's nice to go back, I want to say to the roots. I think we should be looking at training in 1033. I think we should be looking at training what those job performance requirements are. There's a ton of job performance requirements in there, and you ask half these fire investigators, they probably don't know what they are.
Right.
But you can rest assured you're going to be asking about them in court, and if you meet those qualifications. So I think training, we should focus on getting somebody in that's very versed on 1033, maybe somebody on the committee at 1033, start teaching those job performance requirements so that our guys get better. And the same with 921. Every time a new edition of 921 comes out, there's always changes to 921.
Right.
We should try and get somebody from the 921 committee to come in and say, hey, here's what's changed. Here's what you need to know this. If you want to be a fire investigator, you need to know this. You better know it, because if you go into court, good luck.
Yeah.
If you don't know what this stuff is, because, you know, we're getting questioned on this stuff in court more and more and more. You know, 1033 is a big thing in court today that, you know, opposing attorneys are trying to discredit you on, but not following the job performance requirements.
Yeah.
I think we need to educate our members so that they're prepared to handle that. I mean, I think that's a real good focus that we need to start to look at as far as our training goes. You know, I mean, we do a lot of specialty training, and all good and great. I mean, I can't say I've been to bad training here yet in 40-some years. You know, every training is good training, but I think we need to focus on where we come from.
Right.
You know, and how we can make sure that we know these basics that are going to be pushed on us, and we can just slough them up because I know that, I meet that, I'm good there. Then you can start on specialized training.
Right.
You know, and sometimes we get away with it because we got a lot of members here, myself included. You know, I've been here for 43 years. I've been to a lot of training. I've seen the basics over and over and over again. You know, let's get something that's new and special, that you know, just a little special interest that you might run into, you know, once a year or something. But, you know, there's so many younger guys that I think we need to keep thinking about those basics and try and look to train and make sure these guys know those basics, because that's what they're going to get hit on every single time they go to court.
I like the idea of having someone from those organizations that have written the documents be here and you know, just talk to us and answer our questions. And you know, you can get so much from reading the book, but be able to actually speak to the people that are writing this stuff.
I think these people that are involved in writing this document, they're a committee to put it all together. So they're the ones that know why a certain job performance qualification was put in that document.
Yeah.
Because they sat around that committee and they kicked it around before they decided, yes, that's a good thing to put in, and we need to have that in there. So if they know the background of it. So who better to talk to or teach, you know, our group than
Right. Makes sense.
the people that wrote the book. You know?
Well, there's some pretty important people that are going to hear this interview, so perhaps this will influence some of those decisions moving forward. I just have one final question, and it really is has to do with the membership. You know, there has been a decline, as you mentioned, in the numbers, and there's various reasons for that. We may never know exactly what those reasons are, but there is a core group of folks that show up, you know, to these conferences twice a year and are pretty involved and so forth. But there are some younger folks there as well, which is good to see. I'm just wondering if you, after 43 years of being in the organization and all your experience, if you have any advice for those folks that are coming up, you know, moving forward.
I would say, again, train, educate yourself, read these documents that are going to be your lifeblood. You know, you're going to be held responsible for this stuff. So if this is a career path that you've chosen and one that you want to follow and do, first off, remember the IAAI, you know, creed. Bear in mind always, I'm a truth seeker, not a case maker.
Right.
You know, in fact, we're hearing a lot about that in this case this morning. You know the facts. Do your job. Do it diligently. Don't cut corners. You know, it's going to come back to bite you. So I would tell these young people, if you've made the dedication or made the decision that this is a profession that you want to pursue and you want to get into, then you need to jump in with both feet. You need to, you know, attain as much training and education as you can. Go to every possible seminar that you possibly can, and try and absorb this information like a sponge. You know, because you can never have too much knowledge. And you can bet, you know, and I'll speak of this in a private sector, you know, you go out and you investigate a fire and you suspect, you know, XYZ product failed, okay? You put XYZ on notice, XYZ hires the biggest, most expensive attorney they can,
Right.
the biggest, most knowledgeable fire investigators they can, and those are the people you're going up against.
Mm-hmm.
So you're only hurting yourself if you're not trying to educate yourself
Right.
to the best that you can, and that ability. That's what I would try to tell any young person: is be prepared, because, XYZ company is going to spend way more on their attorney than the insurance company that hired you in the first place is willing to pay for their attorney.
Right.
So that kind of puts you in a downward position. Again, that's speaking from the private sector.
Yeah.
I can't speak a lot from the public sector because I never really truly worked in the public sector other than when I first started, doing some for my fire department, but the fire marshal was always involved then too. So I was just more or less a helper, or
Right.
again, learning. Learn. That's my biggest thing I could tell anybody, young people in this profession.
That's good advice. I kind of lied to you. I do have one other question.
Go right ahead. I'm going to check my notes while you're doing it.
So this is the 2025 version of the Jack Christmas training seminar, and I think it's fitting to just talk a little bit about Jack Christmas, and I wanted to know your perspective on Jack. I don't know that you knew him or you ever met him, but what does this what does it mean to be to have this event named after him year after year?
I think that, first off, I did know Jack. I don't say I knew Jack well because, again, I'm from Pittsburgh area. He's from the Philly area. But I knew Jack through coming up here because Jack was always training and did some teaching and stuff. But I didn't know Jack well. But from all the people that did know Jack well, that his dedication to this organization and his dedication to the profession and the teaching and everything he did, I think that, having this named after his honor, since he unexpectedly died, was great. So it's nice that we recognize, again, with the George Lewis Scholarship and the Larry Boyle Scholarship, or two members I know that you know nothing about, but, two longtime members that dedicated and did an awful lot to this organization, that they're remembered somehow, some way within this organization and honored, if you want to call it that. So I think it's great that this is named after Jack Christmas, even though I didn't know him all that well, but I knew who he was, and I just knew the respect that man got from all his peers. And I know that he was a mentor to many. Again, not me, I'm on the wrong side of the state. Well, I'm on the right side, but but that he meant that much to those people, and that's why the push was put forth to name our winter seminar after Jack Christmas. So I think that was a very good thing to do. I have no qualms with that.
So you were the recipient of another form of recognition named after former president member Jack Mason.
Yes.
You want to tell me a little bit about that recognition?
That is an award, the Lifetime Distinguished Service Award, and probably one of the most honored I was to receive an award from this organization. 2 years ago to receive that award from this organization. First, it was just a Lifetime Achievement Award, and the first one went to Jack Mason. And then the board decided to change that to the Jack Mason Distinguished Service Award, which, again, somebody who has dedicated so much of his time and effort to this organization. Jack joined 6 months, I think, after the organization was chartered. So he's been around since day one. If he'd have known they were chartering the organization, he'd have been at that meeting in Harrisburg or Hershey, wherever it was at, and his name would have been on that charter as well. Yet, he's still around, and he still did a lot up until a few years ago when, age starts to set in and can't do the things he used to do as much. So, that was named for him, and it's only been awarded twice, once to Jack and once to myself. But to me, even over the achievement awards and I got a photography award several years ago in the arson category, in the award, and those are all great and wonderful, appreciative awards. But that lifetime achievement award just really meant a lot because, hey, 40-some years I put my lifetime in this organization. I didn't quit or walk away like a lot of people have once they've gone through and gone through the chairs and their presidency is over. They kind of fade away. You never see them again.
Yeah.
Well, it's been 20-some years since I was president, but I'm still here. I'm still working for this organization. I still try to do things that I can now that I'm fully retired. I'm not so much, but that's.
Yeah. Well, my hat's off to you. I think that's kind of the essence of that award. A lifetime doesn't stop when you retire. It continues, and in some way, maintaining your involvement in the organization is a credit to you and to others like you that believe in the organization. And
there are a lot out there. There's no doubt. There's more than us two that got this award since it started. And I can't think how many years it's been since that award was started, but there's certainly more people out there deserving of it, and you need to look at the people that were here. They did their duty. They got involved. Got on the board of directors, went through the chairs, got involved, but after they're done, they stayed involved. They're still willing to try and help out and do things, and there's several past presidents that I can name, or we can go into that room over there and look at several past presidents that are still here. Still pertaining and still getting education because they're still working. They need to get the education, but they're still willing to do things and help this organization, and that builds the stability and the backbone of this organization. I think you need that, so it's a good thing.
So. So I appreciate you being here. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, just to kind of wrap things up?
I would just like to say, first off, Travis, thank you. Thank you for asking me to come and do this interview. I think as a historian, this stuff is really, I think, neat or important to preserve the history of this organization. And I want to thank you for everything you've done.
Oh, you're welcome.
As taking over this historian committee and the work that you've done. And believe me, I know what it used to be like and what some of that stuff looked like. So what you're doing and what you're trying to do, I want to thank you for that, first off. Second off, I just want to thank this organization for what it's done and meant to me over my career. Without this organization, I don't know what I'd be doing. Well, I'd be tired. I'm old enough now, but what I'd have done for my career. I can't state enough of what this organization has done to fulfill taking my hobby and making it a career out of it, and the things I've got to do, the places I've got to go. I've done fires out of the country. I've done fires around the country. So it's just been a fascinating life for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And again, I owe that to this organization. This is what started me. So. Yeah.
Well, we're going to leave it there. I want to just say thank you again so much for doing this with me. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure our paths will cross again.
I hope.
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm not going anywhere.